Many of us see communication, especially high stakes communication that happens in the moment, as scary, as threatening. I would argue these very situations are actually opportunities.
This week, I'm honored to be joined by Matt Abrahams, lecturer at Stanford University's Graduate School of Business, host of the Think Fast, Talk Smart podcast, and now author of Think Faster, Talk Smart, How to Speak Successfully When You're Put on the Spot.
How do I communicate in the moment? And you might say, well, how could you prepare for that? There's a lot you can do to prepare. There's content and there's how you deliver the content. Yeah. And many of us underestimate the importance of the nonverbal presence, what we do with our body and our voice. And the key to nonverbal presence is
conversation is not a battle. The goal should be to have an amazing experience between all the parties being involved.
There's a wonderful rule in improv. Do what's needed. Say enough, and then if people want to know more, allow them to ask questions. You demonstrate your competence better when you say just enough, and then you open yourself up to feedback. And if I go into a flirtation situation or a pitching situation at work, and I try to win or do better than others, I have a lot going on in my head where I'm judging and I'm evaluating and I'm comparing, and that actually reduces the cognitive bandwidth that I have to actually focus on doing what I'm doing well. Communication is about empathy. It's about connection. Love to me can be passion for a person, can be passion for an idea. Communication is the tool through which we express that love.
I know you're a man of challenges, so I wanted to offer you a fun challenge for today. I want you to test me. So I want you to put me on the spot because we're here to solve a problem. My generation doesn't know how to communicate at all. And I want to have a fun way of expressing how we can go about different forms and different strategies to help build upon our communication. So your challenge that I'm going to give to you is at a random time throughout today's podcast, I want you to just cut me off and spontaneously put me on the spot. No, we haven't planned anything beforehand.
Accepted. Challenge accepted.
And we'll see how I respond, if I stutter, if I'm able to answer the question or whatever.
All right, I appreciate it. Game on. I like it. I like your risk taking. That's
awesome. Good. I love it. I saw an article last week, and I'm curious to see if you saw this one too. The big four accounting firms are starting to offer actual classes for their new hires because they're so bad at communicating. Have you seen this?
I have seen this, and I have seen it not just in accounting. I've seen it in other places as well, where people are offering training on just general social skills.
Yeah.
Right. How to look off the screen and look at a person and things of that nature. Yes.
It's crazy to me that this needs to be offered, but it's such a problem that even in the professional setting, they feel the need to actually spend time and money on this. And I was reading through the article that was posted on Yahoo Finance, and the author, their synthesis was, young people are just afraid of looking dumb at work. And it's very true. I see it all the time in the professional setting and the personal setting. One of the things that we're really afraid of when it comes to communicating is the response that we're going to get back. So I think that's a really good starting place for us is, what's your general message to young people is, how do you handle feedback? It's not something that we should be afraid of, but it's an opportunity. So how do you go about expressing that?
Absolutely. So many of us see communication, especially high stakes communication that happens in the moment, as scary, as threatening, as a challenge, something we need to defend and protect against. And I would argue that these very situations are actually opportunities. They're offers. They're chances to extend, expand, to connect, to collaborate. So it's a mindset shift. You know, when we approach our friends and our families, hopefully we look forward to the conversations and communication we have. And in the work world, in the professional world, we can do the same. So it's a mindset shift to see these as opportunities. The younger generation has become accustomed to doing a lot of this communication through devices, remotely, mediated in some way, to reduce the potential in the moment threats and challenges. And if we pull away from the devices and connect with the people, we can actually further our careers, further our understanding, et cetera. So it's in our best interest to connect and see it as an opportunity rather than a threat or a challenge.
To me, it definitely seems an entirely mindset oriented thing, where it's the language that we use with ourselves that tells us that we're not capable of having these conversations. I think one of the starting places for us is self-talk, the conversations that we have with ourselves, because a lot of the times we tell ourselves, oh my God, I'm terrible at public speaking. I can't do this. I'm never going to be able to do this. And it starts there. And it starts in the preparation phase, which you talked about. And one piece of research that I've seen you quote, it was from a man named Noah Zandon. And he had some really interesting points that he talked about, where he was talking about finance in the beginning. He was saying, verbal language impacts the stock price by 2.5%. That's crazy in itself. 10% increase in vocal variety has a significant impact, and 83% of human learning occurs visually. So before you even take the step to get to the communication phase, you have to prepare yourself to have the conversation and prepare yourself to look the part of having the conversation. So can you talk about just the difference between preparing for the vocal part of the conversation versus preparing for the body language part of the conversation?
Well, first and foremost, preparation is key, and a lot of us don't do it. We either we don't have time or we don't make the time to really think through what it is we want to say and plan. So planning and preparation are important. Now, a lot of what I've been talking about recently is this spontaneous communication. How do I communicate in the moment? And you might say, well, how could you prepare for that? There's a lot you can do to prepare in advance. Now, when it comes to preparation, you're exactly right. There's content and there's how you deliver the content.
Yeah.
And many of us underestimate the importance of the nonverbal presence, what we do with our body and our voice. So in a planned circumstance, a meeting that you're running or a presentation that you're giving or a pitch that you plan to deliver, you can actually think through your content in advance. Think about who's your audience, what's important to them, how do I want to actually logically connect my ideas together? And then the next step is to actually practice delivering it.
Yeah.
Not reading it, not memorizing it, but just practice delivering it. And a great tool to help is to digitally record yourself and then watch it. As painful as that is, you will learn so much about yourself. So we've got to prepare the content, and then we have to think about our nonverbal presence. And the key to nonverbal presence is twofold. It's variety and not distracting. So you want to make sure that things vary. Anything that stays the same, people ignore. So if, Tom, I were to talk to you like this, you would tune out very quickly because there's no variation in my voice. Similarly, we don't want to distract. If I were flailing my hands around or saying every other second, you would become distracted. So the two guidelines for a strong nonverbal presence are to vary things up, vary your voice, don't gesture always with the same hand, don't stay in the same position or posture, and also make sure whatever you do, you don't distract by doing something so much so that people don't pay attention to your message. So absolutely we need to prepare, and absolutely we need to practice. And anybody that you find a good presenter, a good communicator, chances are they're preparing and practicing, right? When we look at anybody doing a TED Talk, or if you hold up the leaders of great companies, they're preparing and practicing. We see it and they make it look so effortless, but in fact, there's a lot of effort that goes on behind it.
Yeah. And I'm sure as a podcaster, there's a ton of practice that goes into accurately preparing for a guest to make sure that you can structure a framework of a conversation, but you can also allow it to flow in different directions.
Hey, Tom, let me ask you a question. So tell me, why did you get into podcasting in the first place? You mentioned it. I'm curious. Why'd you get into that?
Well, I was working 2 years into my career in finance, and I work pretty siloed off, not a lot of conversation taking place day to day. And it wasn't fulfilling for me. And when I got to the point where I was like, okay, I can either continue to do this or I can make a change, I decided to make a change. And what I wanted was to put myself in a position where I could have more conversations like this, and I can start branching out and building new skill sets and networking with other people. And I said to myself, podcasting sounds like a lot of fun. So I learned how to do it and just Googled everything by myself, started in my bedroom, and I'm still currently in my bedroom. And here we are today, almost a year later.
I'm in my kid's bedroom, so I think that's a requirement of podcasting. Nicely done. You gave me a challenge to throw you a curveball and ask you to speak spontaneously, and I wanted to do it before we got into too much spontaneous speaking, but you did a nice job of that.
Thank you.
You absorbed it, you took it, you gave an answer that was clear and concise and logical. So I thought you did a nice job. The only advice I would give, if you allow me,
yeah, of course.
I think it's always important to, as best you can, connect any response you give to people who might be listening to you. So adding a few phrases like, and as many people of my age are in a similar situation, the thirst or quest for knowledge is important, and I found this as a nice way to do it. So
Yeah.
do you see how adding that phrase all of a sudden involves the people listening
Yeah.
versus just having you broadcast information? So it's important when you answer questions or give feedback to connect to the people who are listening to it. But otherwise, great job.
Thank you.
You were able to think fast and talk smart. Nicely done.
I read the book on it, so what can I say?
There you go. There you go.
But I love the point that you make there, that it's all about the audience. And I think it's an interesting perspective that you as a podcaster has, because when you're having a conversation with somebody else, they're your audience, but there's also a second audience who you can't hear, but you're also having to cater to their needs and make sure that they're being educated just as well as you're staying in tune with the active audience member, whoever your guest is. Is there something that you've learned over your time in podcasting? It's been almost 3-4 years now that you've been podcasting, that you've learned about communication that previously you didn't understand?
So I think I always understood the value of paraphrasing, but I really came to see how important it is in the podcast work I do.
Yeah.
It's really important to synthesize what somebody says and validate it. And as a podcaster or as a moderator of a meeting or a panel, the paraphrase helps the audience hear it again in a way that might be more concise or more relevant to them. So the one big thing that I think I have done differently, and hopefully, and you all can tell me if I am doing it better or not, is I've really consciously worked on paraphrasing. So I will take extra time after somebody has responded to try to synthesize what they've said, perhaps add a little color commentary to it. So paraphrasing to me, I think, is a very subtle but important communication skill that a good podcaster, I believe, does, and helps the audience to connect and remember.
I agree. And something that I'll do occasionally in conversations, and I have the magic of editing on my side, is when a guest responds to me, I actually will sit here for 10 to 15 seconds and I'll just think about a response, because I don't want to rush into something without actually taking the time to digest what they just told me and come up with a response that shows that I actively took the time to listen to what they have to say. And I think a lot of us, being young people, when we get into a corporate setting, when we get into a situation with our friends, we feel like we have to instantly respond, because that's the way that we respond through technology now, is people expect this instantaneous response all the time. So we feel like it has to carry over into the real world. I think that's kind of a broken way of thinking, but I'm interested to see, you work with students all the time. Do you see this type of response in your classroom when you call? I know that you love cold calling on students, and I think that's
Actually, I don't love cold calling.
Oh, you don't?
I love what I call warm calling. So to me,
Nice.
warm calling is where you alert people that you will be calling on people. Cold calling is where what I just did to you a few moments ago, where I just boom, come in. I think warm calling is much more humane, and it prepares people.
I agree.
Absolutely. In my many years, you can tell by the gray hair and lack of it, I've been doing this a long, long time. And certainly the immediacy and expectation of rapid response to communication has increased a lot.
Yeah.
Now, technology allows for it, and as a part of that, people expect it. But it is not unusual for a student to send me an email late at night and then expect an answer, early in the morning. And so part of it is just appropriate expectation setting, but certainly there is this notion of rapid response. And you're right, as part of that, we lose some of the connection and synthesis that can happen in communication that can validate on two levels. One, it validates you as a person. If I demonstrate I've really listened, and a paraphrase is a great way to do it. And I'm not saying a grand paraphrase where I say, so Tom, what I hear you saying is, and repeat verbatim. I'm just saying extracting the key value or key point. But there's another type of validation that's equally important. I'm validating that I actually understood what you said, because I'm about to respond. And if I didn't understand it, you now have an opportunity to correct me. So imagine you ask me a question and I start answering a question that you did not ask. That would be weird for you and awkward for me. So by paraphrasing, you could say, no, what I really meant was this, and then we're both in alignment. So there are two types of validation that comes from taking the time to paraphrase and connect.
Yeah. And I think it comes back to another point that I love that you bring up, is that conversation is not a battle. Nobody is coming here to win the conversation. The goal should be to have an amazing experience between all the parties being involved. And I think so often maybe it's this me culture that social media promotes to us, but so often it seems like we're trying to win the conversation as opposed to engaging in a beautiful kind of art form where you're flowing with the person. You're getting into a state of just transcendence. It's flying by in terms of time. And I'm interested to get your opinion on this topic too, where I think sometimes maybe someone who's listening won't agree with what I just said, where they'll be like, oh, I'm not trying to win a conversation when I'm speaking with somebody. But maybe that's the person they're not trying to beat. So what I mean by that is, let's say you have two people who meet in a bar type of setting, and the guy is trying to woo the girl or something like that. He's trying to beat all the other guys that she could potentially be talking to. So he's not talking like himself. He's trying to talk like someone who he thinks that she wants him to be. Or you're in a corporate setting. You're trying to talk as if you're the star employee, and you're trying to beat everyone else who's going for the same promotion as you. Do you agree with this type of setting? Not setting. Do you agree with this type of sentiment that maybe the person we're trying to beat isn't even involved in some of the conversations that we may be having?
I think that's actually very perceptive of you. I have several things I want to share. So first, I think you're right that in many communication situations, we look at communication much like a tennis match. I'm lobbing something over the net and I want it to score. I want it to land. I want to make the right thing, say the right thing, do it the right way. And I actually think a whole different analogy, sports analogy, is appropriate. And when I was your age, a lot of us would spend a lot of time playing hacky sack. And hacky sacks where you've got this little beanbag ball, and the whole goal is for you to kick it around a circle and never have the ball drop. And that's really what I see communication as. We all have a role to play. We keep the ball up in the air, and there's fun and success in doing that. So it's not about winning. It's not about scoring a point. It's really about just keeping things moving and having everybody have a pleasurable experience in doing it. There's a wonderful rule in improv, and I'm a big fan of improvisation. I think we can all learn a lot from improv. And the most famous rule of improv is yes and, right? So you accept and you see things as offers, and that's a very powerful mindset. But there's another rule, which is do what's needed, nothing more, nothing less. And in an improv scene, doing what's needed might be just being quiet, or just saying yes and not trying to be the big star of the moment. And the same is true in our communication. If I go into a flirtation situation or a pitching situation at work and I try to win or do better than others, then I have a lot going on in my head where I'm judging and I'm evaluating and I'm comparing. And that actually reduces the cognitive bandwidth that I have to actually focus on doing what I'm doing well. So do what's needed, nothing more, nothing less, can actually help you do better at what you're doing. Because when you really go in with a lot of pressure you're putting on yourself, you reduce the cognitive bandwidth you have to do it well.
I love that. And that's one of the best pieces of advice that I've ever gotten when I was at work. When I first started out in my career, one of the pieces of advice that I got was, you struggle at synthesizing. And I had to think about it for a second. I was like, I really do, where I would go on for too long and I would try to give more details as kind of a mechanism of showing how much I've taken the time to study this, how much I care about it. But I'm boring the audience. I'm going way too over their heads. I'm going way too in deep into something that I don't need to. And I try to take that same advice into podcasting, where, yes, of course, I try to have a dialogue with the guest. I want to make sure that they feel comfortable and they don't feel like they're talking all the time. But at the same time, I don't need to go on and on and on with a story or an anecdote. I'm going to lose the audience. We're going to lose track of the conversation. I think it's kind of a fine line that you have to walk to show that, yes, I care and I want to take the time to explain my thoughts. But at the same time, I need to allow the person I'm having the conversation with or the group to ask questions so they can go into their realm of the conversation that they want to. One thing that I think people, sorry, go ahead. Do you have something to say?
One thing I would comment on there is, first, my mother has this saying that I love. She didn't create it, but I like it a lot. And it's tell the time, don't build the clock.
I love
A
that.
lot of us are clock builders for many reasons. One is we want to demonstrate we know this so well, so I'm going to tell you every little piece about it. The other part of it is that we want to walk people through our thought process, with the idea being that if you understand everything that I did and thought and acted upon, that you too will come to the same conclusion. But you realize that yourself, or we're instructed or given feedback that you've then adjusted and adapted. Say enough. And then if people want to know more, allow them to ask questions. And in fact, you demonstrate your competence, I believe, better when you say just enough, not too much, and then you open yourself up to feedback and inquiry. That really demonstrates confidence. So
Yeah.
when in competence, so I say what I need, and I say, hey, do you have any questions? Wow,
Yeah.
that's somebody who knows their material, because they're willing to give you what you need and then ask for what you need even more.
Yeah. I like both parts of that too. Competence and confidence. Where
Yes.
if you have the confidence to allow someone to ask you questions and you don't know what avenue it's going to take you, I agree. I think that's something I'm trying to work on too, is being more confident in making the assertion, making the statement, and allowing the conversation to flow. I think one thing that I notice of my peers personally is we'll talk all the time about trying to have conversations with new people, and people are very quick to write off other people who they don't know. They'll say, "Oh, it just seemed like they weren't into the conversation. They didn't seem like they cared at all. So I don't care about having the conversation. I'm not going to try to build it up. I'm not trying to keep going." And that's how nothing gets done. Um, I'm interested to hear your opinion on it too. Do you think we try to force conversations too much? Or do you think that there is a balance that we need to strike as to we can only take it so far? And if someone's not engaging in the conversation with us, here's the point we need to realize that we need to walk away.
So I definitely don't recommend that people engage in conversations where they don't think they're getting value or the people they're speaking with are getting value, for sure.
Yeah.
But when you describe the circumstance you just described, where you're talking to somebody and they don't seem like they're engaged, so should I just walk away? My immediate response is, what can you do to get them more engaged? There are lots of reasons that people, well, two things I want to say. One, somebody who doesn't look engaged may in fact be engaged. So my question to you, to somebody, would always be, uh, how do you know? Right? I'll give a quick example. I had somebody come into one of my classes, sits down, closes his eyes, puts his head back as soon as I start speaking. Immediately, I think this person is totally disengaged, has no interest. Why are they here?
Yeah.
Turns out that he was visually impaired. He closed
Oh,
his eyes so he could hear better. He was my best student. So my point is, what you see is not always what you get. So you might be assuming the person is disengaged when in fact they are quite engaged. So number one.
yeah.
Number two, if somebody is not engaged, take it upon yourself to try to find ways to engage them. Maybe you ask some questions. Maybe you try to readjust your content so that it's more relevant and important to them. Maybe you come to the realization that this is the fifth meeting that somebody has had back to back, and it doesn't matter what you're saying, they're not going to be engaged. So just because somebody isn't engaged doesn't mean that they don't want to be engaged. There might be some external factors that are preventing that. So seek and say, hey, how could this be of value to you? Or how have you seen this play out in your life? Give them an opportunity to connect to it. Or you
Yeah.
might say, what if we take a break and maybe we can have this conversation tomorrow? Would that be better for you? So just because somebody isn't engaging doesn't mean you wipe your hands and you walk away from the conversation. If it's an important one to you and you think it's important to them, try to figure out how to connect and engage.
Yeah. I think there's always a solution. And like you said, sometimes the solution might be take a break and come back to it. That's
Yeah.
something that a lot of us, we try to force through. We're like, we don't really take the time to understand other people's emotions. We don't take the time to understand maybe what they're going through. I think I don't want to call it simplistic, but something we can try to implement into our like little quiver of strategies is asking other people, hey, what do you need right now that I can help provide to you? I think that's something that a lot of us don't do. We take into consideration our own personal feelings and we disregard other people's feelings. And in terms of operating with your students, operating in professional settings, how are you able to implement understanding other people's emotions to help your conversational skills?
It's absolutely foundational and critical. I believe empathy is the beginning place for communication. We often make a mistake, all of us, when we communicate. We focus on what we want to say. And really, what's important is, what does your audience need to hear? So it's not about what you want, it's about what they need.
Yeah.
And you're right, the emotional needs of an audience is as important, if not more important in some cases, than the informational needs that they have. So you need to take all of that into account. When I go around asking people, how will you know if your communication was successful? Many people say, I got through it. And they say it very honestly. I find it funny, but they say, hey, I got through all my material, therefore I was successful. But did the audience understand it? Are they taking information and impact away from what you said? If
Yeah.
they're not, then I don't think you were successful. So the only way to be successful is to make sure that your audience got what they needed. And in order to do that, you have to really reflect on, who is my audience in the moment? What is it that they need? How can I adjust and adapt my communication to it? So it's both emotion and information, and you have to focus on both to be successful in communication.
Yeah. And I think we definitely try to focus on one and ignore the other. Which one that
Most
is, I think
people
it's up
do.
to the person. Yeah, absolutely. But I think whoever can find the balance between the two is who is a successful conversationalist, who's really successful at giving speeches. And I think one thing that would really help the audience is if we went over structure, how to structure speeches, how to structure conversations. And one of the
Yes.
simplistic ones that you go over, which I love, which I try to implement into this conversation, is what, so what, now what? Can you just give a really basic introduction to this structure, and why do you think this is so beneficial for anybody to learn?
Absolutely. So whenever you have to speak, you have to focus on two things: what to say and how to say it. And this can be quite taxing to think about it, especially in spontaneous speaking situations like answering questions, giving feedback, fixing the mistakes you've made, making small talk. These are all high stress situations for many people. And if you have to be thinking about what to say and how to say it all the time, it can be really taxing on you. So structure is a key. Structure is nothing more than a logical connection of ideas. Think of it as a map or a recipe. If I'm trying to get from one place to the next, having a map helps me. And so having a structure helps. There are many structures. The one that most people are most familiar with is a simple problem, solution, benefit structure. If you've ever tried to convince anybody of anything, maybe it's a parent to let you get a new car or a used car, or stay out after curfew. Maybe you're an entrepreneur trying to sell people on your product or service. Problem, solution, benefit is a very typical structure. I first explain a problem that I'm having, you're having, the society is having. I then explain how my solution will fix, remedy, or remove that particular problem. And then the benefits that happen for you, for me, for society as a result. It's very common. Most people have used it either explicitly or implicitly. There are lots of other structures for lots of other circumstances. The one you mentioned happens to be my favorite simply because it is useful in so many circumstances. So let me explain the what, so what, now what structure. You start by talking about what it is. It could be your idea, your product, your service, your belief. You then explain why it's important to the person or people you're talking to. That's the so what. And then afterwards, the now what is what comes next. Maybe it's time for questions. Maybe it's let's set up another meeting. Maybe it's let me show you an example. So simply by answering the three questions, what, so what, and now what, you've packaged together some interesting information. And if you'll allow me, Tom, let me give you a few examples so people can see how versatile this is. Imagine, Tom, you and I come out of a meeting and you ask me, you say, hey, Matt, how do you think that meeting went? I can give you feedback in the what, so what, now what structure. The what is my feedback. Tom, I thought the meeting went well, except when you talked about the implementation plan. You spoke a little quickly and you didn't give as many examples as you did elsewhere. That's my what. The so what. When you speak quickly and don't give a lot of detail, people think you're a little concerned or underprepared for that particular content. The now what. Here's what I'd like you to do. The next time you talk about the implementation plan, slow down and provide these two particular examples that will help demonstrate what it is you're talking about. Do you see how in doing that, I knew how I was going to say it. I had my structure. All I had to do was plug in the pieces I wanted to say. It's like having a recipe and all you do is plug the ingredients into the recipe and hopefully it'll turn out well.
Yeah.
Similarly, when I'm writing an email, and believe me, people are not good at writing emails that are understandable. Subject line is the now what, that's what you'd like. And the body of the email is the what and the so what. So all of a sudden, by using this structure, you're able to help people clearly understand what you're saying. And I encourage everybody listening to try to do this. Now, Tom, I want to take a quick time out.
Yeah, of course.
I just answered your question using what, so what, now what. I gave my answer, what. I told you why it was important, and I encouraged everybody to use it. So a third use case for what, so what, now what is using it to answer questions.
I love that. Oh, that was so good. That was great.
I've said it a few times.
But it shines through. And again, I think another part of that we've alluded to multiple times already is you're prepared to have that kind of structure implemented into your arsenal where you're ready to use it at the get-go. And it shows at how professional that answer was, how quick and how synthesized it was. And I think the audience can really resonate with that. If I wanted to go in and I can clip that part and just put that out as its own piece of content, it would be really easy for me because there was no stuttering. There was no varying off into different tangents,
right?
Just clear, cut, concise. I think that's perfect.
You're right. And here's the key. The key is you have to practice. You know, anybody who's played a sport or played a musical instrument knows you get better by practicing. I practiced this structure for many, many years, and all of your listeners can practice very simply. I want you at any point during Tom's podcast to just hit pause and think to yourself, what was just said? Why is it important to me? And what can I do with it? Just ask yourself the three questions. What, so what, now what? Answer it, think about it, then hit play again. A little later, hit pause, do the same thing. So when you hear something, when you read something, at the end of it, or somewhere in the middle, just think to yourself, what was it about? Why is it important to me? And what can I do with it? And simply by drilling that, much like a soccer player goes around cones, or a basketball player shoots free throws, or a musician plays the chords as a way of warming up, all of this hones and builds that skill. So in the moment when you need it, it's second nature. That's what I mean by preparing to be spontaneous, right? And people say, what, hey, what? Those two are antithetical. You can prepare to be spontaneous, right? Just like an athlete, just like a musician. So taking the time to practice is how you get better at it.
I couldn't agree more. Okay, so we're being spontaneous now. Zoom is telling me we only have 6 minutes left. So I'm going to go into lightning round, which is
I've got my raincoat on. Let's do it.
Nice. So some final questions that I wanted to give you. First and foremost, I heard you say multiple times that you don't view yourself as a master of conversation, even though this has been a masterful conversation. I can't applaud you enough for doing this with me today. I'm interested to hear this conversation that I'm trying to have is all about having people define success for themselves. So how do you think your conversational skills have allowed you to succeed in certain areas of life? And where do you see the next evolution taking place?
Oh, what a wonderful question. I love it. So my communication skills over time have allowed me to connect better. So by listening, by paraphrasing, by being present-oriented, I have been able to connect better in my personal life with my family, in my professional life with my friends. So connection for sure. And over time, it has evolved. I still have a long way to go, but I am better connected as a communicator than I have ever been. Wow. Where do I see this going? That's a great question. I am very fascinated by generative AI and technology and how we can leverage technology to connect, to make things even more concise and clear. I think it's fraught with challenges, much like the challenges you brought up with people staring at screens all the time. But the next evolution of my thinking and where I really want to spend some time is how do we integrate some of these cool, interesting new technologies in a way that helps us and doesn't detract from the very connection I started talking about.
I could have a whole conversation with you just about AI and the future of everything.
Yeah.
One thing that you do, kind of going from the future to an ancient form, is you're a karate black belt, which I think is really cool. Do you
I've
know
done karate for almost twice as long as you've been on this planet? So yes,
that's quite the accomplishment in itself. I was interested. It's kind of an abstract question, but I'm interested to see your response. Do you see any aspects of conversation carrying over into karate? What I mean by that is when you're sparring or maybe you're in competition, it's kind of spontaneous and you have to be able to communicate with your partner and everything like that. Do you see any of those principles applying to what you do in karate?
100%. Absolutely. Without a doubt. There are so many things that the martial arts have taught me that help me as a communicator, and many things that I've learned as a communicator that help my martial arts. So when you are studying the martial arts, traditional martial arts, there are really three different areas of study. There's kata. Kata is performed routines that you do over and over again, much like a structured speech with slides and everything.
Yeah.
There is sparring, which is completely spontaneous. I mean, you don't know what the other person's going to throw, but you have trained in the third area, repetitive drills. Sometimes they call these basic combinations, techniques, whatever. But you've learned how certain patterns of movement go together, just like how certain phrases go together or certain ideas tend to go together. So by blending these three, the spontaneous with the completely planned, with the logical connecting of certain techniques, you can perform better as a martial artist, a complete martial artist. And the same is true when you communicate. You have to practice planned, spontaneous, and drilling so that you can bridge the two.
That's awesome. I used to do karate as a kid. I gave up. That's something I want to get back into. And
you
kind
should.
of inspired me to do
it. It can be life-changing.
Absolutely. Well, this conversation, I hope, is going to change somebody's life and promote them to start talking more, promote them to be a better conversationalist. And this is my final question. I'm making it like my show stable question, and it's open-ended. And it's, what has all of your experiences taught you about love? And you can take that however you want. Love for conversation, love for the world, love for other people, just anything.
I love this question. I know that's a little ironic. I think I'm going to go back to this notion of connection. At its foundation, communication is about empathy. It's about connection and love. And love to me can be passion for a person, can be passion for an idea, can be passion for an ideal. And communication is the tool through which we express that love. And I encourage everybody to find many things in their lives for which they are super passionate, and they can communicate it well, not just to others, but to themselves, so you can articulate clearly what you're passionate about.